All right, so we continue our segment of the skeletal system. Tomorrow we'll continue, we'll wrap up the skeletal tissue, and then talk about the 5 functions of bones. And then don't forget that your first diagram quiz will be on Thursday, and review some of them bones. So as we look at this, I think what makes the most sense is we talk about the cranium. Okay, the top portion here. There's only 2 bones that actually repeat themselves. And what would that be? There's 8. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Okay, when we're talking about the cranium, there's actually 3 sets of bones that repeat themselves, not 1. Okay, so there's 8 bones that make up the cranium. Just start naming them off and pointing to them. Frontalis, yes. Okay, so temporal, that's a muscle it's also a muscle, but it's a bone that repeats itself. So you pointed the frontalis here, so go ahead and point to the temporal bone. That's why you got this.
Wait, what is this? Is it the size? What are the sides? Oh, I like the blade.
Okay.
Isn't this type of blade?
Right, because we said this is representing kind of like your temporalis muscle right here. So your temporal bone is right here. And that's what you're feeling when you clench your jaw. You can feel your temporalis there.
Why
Okay.
is blade all these like
I don't know. So you got the frontalis, you got the temporal bone. That's one that repeats itself. Okay, so keep going. This is your occipital bone. That's right. Yep. Up here. Letter P. Parietal bones. Here and here. Okay. So we've got these up here, and we've named this one as a temporal bone. And then finally, this last one is Latin for bat's wing, and it starts with an S. SPH. So sphen something. Yep. Sphenoid bone. You said spheno, but it's actually sphenoid. And that is right in front of the temporal bone. Okay? So now, we've done the bones of the cranium, because remember, the skull is this whole thing. The cranium, however, is just what makes up this top portion. Okay, so there are 4 sutures. No. L. Okay. Lamb something. Lamboidal suture. Okay.
That's the one right here, right?
It locks the occipital bone to the parietus. Okay? So, what's the one that goes right down the middle? Starts with an S.
I knew that, and it starts with an S.
Well, that's why we're going over it, because you've got time to look at it. Remember, we said there's no good way. We can try to correlate these things, but you have to memorize them. So, not sag, but sag something.
Sagittal.
Yep. This is a sagittal suture. Okay? Then, where's the coronal? We said, think of making a C, and then turn it on its side, and fits right here. So it locks together your frontal bone with your parietal. Then the last one is way back here, which is actually called your squamosal suture. Okay? And that's your parietal bone with part of your temporal bone. Okay. So the ones that repeat themselves are sphenoid, temporal, and parietal bones. Those are the ones that have left and a right. Then your frontal, your occipital, and then that's what makes up the bones in the cranium. Then you have those sutures, frontal, sagittal, I misspoke there. The coronal's here, sagittal here, lamboidal back here, and squamosal on the side. Okay, so there is one bone here that starts with a Z. You are correct. And it gets its name because it allows us to smile. Okay, so it actually pulls your jaw, but it attaches to this bone. That's why the muscle and the bone are named the same. And zygo something. Zygomatic. This is your zygomatic bone because your zygomaticus muscle here actually raises that, what helps you smile. Okay, so now we move down here to this. That's your mandible. Then above that, not maximal. It is max something. Maxilla. Okay. Then down here, picture it's an upside down V. So it's not Homer, but vomer. This is your vomer. Okay. Then this is what we call the perpendicular plate to the ethmoid bone. This one right here. Okay. Now, the rest of these are actually a lot of condyles and processes. In other words, we talk about this is where your sternocleidomastoid muscle gets its name because this is on what bone? Nope, that's back here. Temporal bone. So this is the mastoid process. Again, sternocleidomastoid. That's why it gets its name. So the mastoid process here. Maybe it'd be better on this side. Okay. Then down here, this is a really large hole at the base of the skull. There's a good reason for that. Because what goes through that? The spinal cord, which then you get even higher on the spinal cord, you get to that of the brain stem. Okay, so this is not, it's typically called the foramen magnum. Okay, foramen means a hole in a bone, and magnum because it's the largest hole in any bone. Okay, because otherwise a lot of these, this is called a mental foramen down here on the, hold it up a little closer. See that there's a little hole there, and that's for allowing blood vessels to travel through. Okay, so now we have this foramen magnum, a mental foramen, because again, foramen means hole in a bone, your mastoid process. This, however, is called your styloid process, way down here. It's just a little tiny projection. I don't know if I can get the right angle on there to where you can see it. That's the styloid process. Then you have what we call there's a coronoid and a coracoid process. And that's these two protrusions on here. That's one of the things I always have to review. So that would be in your word bank, so don't forget that. And when you're doing these diagrams, okay, is there a word bank? Yes. But do you get it right away? No. Because otherwise, if you just rely on that, you're not setting yourself up for very good habits for the next time you see this material. Okay, so even though that was maybe 15 bones and structures, you can always, I guarantee you're going to have a view like this. There's going to be one probably like this. There's going to be one where there's this is going to be split in half, and you just see half of the skull. And just different views that you're not always going to have the same view when you're dealing in medicine. That's why it's always so important to know your left and your right, because as you're looking at that mirror image, just remember that as you're doing this, it's easy when you hold it like this and say, well, this is the right and this is the left. When you turn it like this, you have to remember this is the left and this is the right. even though it's not your left and right, it's that mirror image that you're looking for. Okay, so what I would suggest that you do for just a few minutes, get that list out and then that diagram in the book and compare that to what you see here so we can be ready for Thursday. So, that's all I've got. We'll catch up to you next time.